There's a little bit of steam about the Dame trade. Maybe, possibly, we can get this thing over with before training camp begins. We'll talk about what that could mean and why. Plus, are the Knicks really ready for a star trade if it were to happen? And James Harden to the Clippers does not look like it's going to happen. What does that mean for Harden, and what are the decisions facing the former MVP? All that and more on Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA, your daily source for all things NBA from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us and making us your first listen. We appreciate you guys joining us on whatever platform you've chosen. Whether you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, you can leave us a 5-star review if you'd be so kind. Or if you're checking us out on YouTube, you can find the show on YouTube. Just search for Locked On NBA on YouTube, and you can see a video version of the show. We do record this live on Mondays during the season. David Ramil and I'll be recording after the games to give you the breakdowns on all the big events from the NBA Nights action. On today's show, we'll talk about the Damian Lillard saga and how it continues, but there's starting to be a little bit of steam, and I got some stuff that I think we should talk about on that front. Are the Knicks really ready for a star trade? Because there's a lot of noise about them potentially making a big deal and some interesting stuff on an agent front with a key player. We'll talk about that. And the Clippers reportedly are not interested in a James Harden deal anymore. They are moving on. What does that mean for Harden? Will the two sides re-enter negotiations later? We'll talk about all that and more on today's show. Want to let you know today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. My name is Matt Moore. I'm senior NBA writer for the Action Network and co-host of Locked On Nuggets, joined by David Ramil. He's co-host of Locked On Heat, along with Wes Goldberg. You can find him on Twitter at DRamil13. Yes, I will still call it Twitter until the end of time. David, how you doing, man?
Counting down the days, media day, 2 weeks exactly from the start of the season. Should be an exciting time. Should be a good year. Looking forward to it and not having to dig deeper than I normally would in order to find NBA news and notes to talk about.
It has been an uncharacteristically quiet time of year. Yeah. Even like August is always quiet. September is usually pretty quiet. I do not recall it being this quiet. There's no like headline making interviews. There's no scandal that broke out really. There's been a couple of things obviously that were really unfortunate. We touched on those last week. Like there's been some stuff, but really it's been a very, very quiet offseason around the NBA, even as kind of all the drama continues to circulate. Damian Lillard and James Harden, as I will link those again together, as I know you love that I do. Let's start with the Damian Lillard stuff. So
let's do it.
I think it was 2 weeks ago, maybe it was last week, when Shams Charania comes out and reports again. It was kind of an auspicious report. Mm-hmm. And Shams Charania of The Athletic reports, once again, Damian Lillard will not report to any camp that he is traded to unless it is Miami. He will not arrive for camp. If theoretically he was traded to, I don't know, say the Toronto Raptors, he will not report to training camp. It is no surprise that I've heard that this is based off of there was some tire kicking that went on. I've heard that it's not just one team, that multiple teams in the Eastern Conference, the Raptors being one of them. That's the thing nobody was really saying, but like everyone around the league kind of knows, like, yeah, the Raptors are amongst the teams. I don't think that they're the only team, but they have kicked the tires. And what that means, if you're asking like, well, what does that mean? It's not about engaging Portland. It's about getting in touch with Dame's representatives and being like, hey,
right.
If we pulled the trigger on this, are you sure you don't want to come to camp? Because like we'd have a pretty good team. And the response so far has been cold. It's been very much like, no, Dame's holding the line, or at least through his representatives he is. And like, that's kind of the thing that's really key here is I would imagine that his representatives are like, don't pick up the phone unless it's somebody that that's in your contacts. Let me handle this to try and get into Miami, because if Dame gets on the phone and is like, well, yeah, man, like I love OG, and like, yeah, like Siakam's really good, whatever it would be. Or if it's, Brooklyn or Philadelphia or wherever, the minute that they get a sense of like, oh, so he won't hold out, like that makes the deal a lot more appealing. And so there's kind of probably, I would imagine, a little bit of interference running on this. That is to say, at the same time, there's been a lot of conversation about various Miami sources have reported that there's been a little bit of momentum, that they started re-engaging. I have some theories as to kind of where this is headed. I am curious to your reaction as you hear all of this in recent days.
I'm not surprised by the idea of lots of teams being interested. I still, I think it's a lukewarm interest more than anything else. And I at least from the team's perspective, like acquiring Dame Lillard is fine, in theory. But I just, I've been pretty consistent about this. I still don't see which team stands to benefit as much as Miami does from the acquisition of Lillard and is as interested in pursuing him as Miami is. So I can see why you'd kick the tires and see if maybe, again, if the market's been pushed down because of Miami's interactions through media or whatever, and maybe a Toronto or another team says, you know what, if they're going to already throw a lowball offer at Portland's going to accept it, why wouldn't I just go ahead and do the same? That might be just slightly better without having to give up, say, I don't know, Scotty Barnes or something along those lines.
Right.
And maybe that's just might be enough. So I could see why other teams are calling and making some, making some pitches there. I can understand from Portland's perspective, trying to draw up the market, push it, maybe see if you can get an extra asset or an extra pick or something along those lines. But it's the inevitability of it. And I know a lot of people have said, oh, well, he's a Heat guy, the arrogance on him. I see it as being inevitable that Dame winds up in Miami. And it's been pretty consistent the whole time, because of whatever reason, it just hasn't seemed like the same kind of buzz. Like even when Kevin Durant last year, when he put his name out there in the first place, and he had his wish list, and it was Phoenix and Miami or some other teams, etc. But there seemed like there was more of a league-wide general interest. I mean, you're reporting this. Mark Spears just reported this shortly before we started recording this. A lot of teams interested in Dame, but it just doesn't feel like a lot of teams are interested in Dame. So I don't know. I still see a possibility of Dame winding up in Miami before the start of training camp on October 3rd.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I'm still of the mindset that he's going to wind up in Miami. I've been there consistently. I've said that over and over again. No matter how much I may trash the Miami offer, and it's garbage, I will still maintain that they're going to wind up with him. I do want to be clear because I need to be clear on this. I haven't spoken to anybody in Toronto, so it's not like anybody with Toronto has contacted me and been like, "Yeah, we put in an offer for Dame." Everybody around the league that I've talked to is like that they have heard that it's Toronto, and maybe that's entirely based off of putting two together with the Shams report, right? But the indications I've gotten are that no, that there was probably a little bit of genuine interest from Toronto on that front, along with a few other teams. The other kind of side of this I do think is interesting is I think that there's a possibility. So one thing I try and do is I try and see the board. This next part is not reporting. This is just entirely subjective. I'm just going to I'm putting pieces together here. I do tend to try and find situations that are unrelated and see if there's a possibility of them being involved when there's a lingering situation like this. And we've talked over the summer a lot about Atlanta and Toronto and Dallas, and those three teams being in a conversation. We did a show on that. I think there's probably a pretty strong possibility I think there's among the frameworks I think Miami has tried to seek out to get the assets that'll convince Portland to give up the ghost. I think among them is probably that they've talked to Atlanta and they probably talked to Dallas. And they probably talked to Atlanta about hey, what if we help you do a deal to move Capella to Dallas? We'll take THJ's contract, because I would imagine Miami be like, oh, are you tall and can stand on the wing? Yeah, we could use you at this point. So I would imagine that there's a possibility of them talking to Atlanta, talking to Toronto, and trying to get those kind of conversations involved. This isn't to say that that's going to be how the final deal shakes out, but it kind of gives you a sense, I think, of what might wind up happening is when there's been these things that have been in conversations for a while. And then Atlanta and Dallas talked for years about a Collins trade, and then they shifted to Capella after the Hawks moved Collins to the Jazz. So there's kind of multi-team frameworks that are still kind of in motion here. And those teams, I think, probably do have the assets. They have at least the young players that could satisfy what Portland would at least feel a little bit better about. And to be quite honest, it might mean that Miami doesn't have to give up both Nikola Jovic and Tyler Hero in a deal. Maybe, they've only got to give up one, which would obviously be a big win for Miami.
That's a possibility. It's interesting that you say that it gets kind of more and more complicated, and yet Miami would stand to benefit because, what I'm hearing, I guess, locally, and again, maybe that's just skewed by the fact that it's Miami-based media, it just seems like the offer, as crappy as it might have been from what was reported a couple of months ago, is getting more and more crappy as time passes. Now Heat fans are convinced they're going to give up Kyle Lowry and a second-round pick in order to get Damian Lillard. That's just the men's mindset, that they're going to wind up keeping Tyler Hero, that they're going to wind up keeping Caleb Martin, that only one of the rookies will be sent over there. One of the young players, Jovic and or Jaime Jaquez. And that's basically it. So how would it work for the team, for more teams to be involved, and yet for Miami's package being smaller than what was originally reported? How would that work out? Just because you get an additional team that might be able to provide something to Portland that they would actually want?
So I think the way it kind of would work is if there's a team that's looking to move a contract, and Atlanta I think is a good fit on this, because what I've heard is that they believe very much in Onyeka Okongwu. And Onyeka Okongwu is really good. So if you can move Capella and get Tyler Hero, you are now swapping out an asset you want to move anyway and getting a plus asset in Tyler Hero.
So Hero to the Hawks and Capella to the Mavs, and then Tim Hardaway Jr. to Miami?
This is, again, speculative. Want to be clear?
Sure, no, I get it. I'm trying to understand. So that's how it would all work out.
Like I have, I'll send it to you. I got a framework that actually kind of works, and it involves like the Mavericks would wind up sending a young player in it. They would send one of their young guys, and Atlanta has a bunch of young guys that they can honestly probably, depending on how they feel. Now, don't get me wrong here. If you're a Hawks fan and you're like, why would they do that? I don't think they should. Like, I'd rather have Clint Capella than Tyler Hero, or at least be able to try and trade him later for other assets.
I'd be honestly, that's really tricky. The young Hero backcourt, that would be risky.
Tyler would be six man, right? So you'd always be able to have two of Hero, DeJounte Murray, and Trey on the floor. And that combo, I think, is like where that works. And again, if you're just like, this doesn't make any sense, sure. But if you're like, hey, this gets us a former 6 man of the year winner that can run the second unit, and we clear out minutes for Onyeka Okongwu, now all of a sudden you're like, okay, it's not a bad return, depending on what happens. But again, the other problem here is that when you start getting into these 3-4 team, like this is one of the problems I think Miami's going to face, is when you start getting into 3 and 4 team trades, it's difficult. Like the more people you got to appease, the more chances an owner just says, no, I don't want to do this. I like that guy. No. And that's why I think it gets tricky. On the other side, we'll talk about the Knicks, who one of their star players made an interesting decision over the weekend. We'll talk a little bit about that. And we'll try and ask the question, are the Knicks ready for a big star trade? We'll do that on the other side here on Locked On NBA. But first, I need to tell you about FanDuel Sportsbook. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. I had a great day betting NFL yesterday at FanDuel Sportsbook. Had an absolutely phenomenal day. I went 7-3 yesterday on teasers, sides, and totals. Absolutely phenomenal. It was a really great day. Thank you, Seattle. Thank you so much. You are the best. Love you, Seahawks. You're incredible. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app's so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. And you can get out some NBA futures as well. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Back here on Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us, making us part of your day. Appreciate you guys being with us on a Tuesday. If you're listening to this on the podcast, joining us on YouTube on a Monday. David Ramil and Matt Moore with you. All right, so David, some interesting news over the weekend with regards to Julius Randle, who decided to change agencies. He's been a longtime CAA client, and he's left the agency and he signed with WME Sports, represented by George Bass. And that's who he was represented by first, and then he's been represented by Mintz and Steve Human of CAA for a long time. Yeah. So the move to WME, I think this is one of those deals that goes very under the radar because it's like, who cares? The Knicks are CAA. That's what they are. Is like they've always, this has been decades multiple of how long a lot of members of their internal organization are members of CAA or alumni from CAA, including President of Basketball Operations Leon Rose. So a decision to leave CAA when you play for the Knicks is absolutely eye-opening. That's a very interesting prospect, and it's only going to add fuel to the fire of the potential of Julius Randle being traded here.
Yeah, you get an agent who is like outside of that, because if not, you want to be represented by somebody who has your interests, not the Knicks organization, or not CAA and their interests at heart. So it makes total sense for Julius. I'm honestly a little surprised that it hasn't happened before, but maybe it's just a matter of, you've got a relationship with your agent. I totally get it. But now by switching to a different agent outside of the current party, you want to be able to say, you know what? We're planning for something down the road, and I want somebody in my corner who has my interests at heart, not necessarily the team's. And so I get it. So how do you see this playing out? How is Julius getting his own agent because he's going to request a trade, because he's in the middle of contract negotiations and he wants to be able to secure a better deal than whatever CAA / the Knicks are going to be able to provide? What's the bottom line for Julius in seeking out new representation?
Yeah, usually when this happens, the player is either fresh off of a free agency where he feels he got a raw deal and he's not happy with how that went, or he's a prospective free agent and he's switching it because he's going to be a free agent and he's looking to do that. Or in the case of Anthony Davis, he's looking to strong arm the team that he works for into giving him up to the team he wants to go to, who's also represented by the agent of that guy. Not that everything is completely above board in the NBA. But Randle's under contract for the next 2 years. He's got a player option for 25-26. So we're like a long way from Julius Randle being a free agent. And to me, that what this does kind of signal, though, is like a separation from the Knicks, is that he doesn't feel like his interests are being represented. And that could be anything from like he feels like internally he's being blamed too much when the Knicks struggle. He had a lot of problems with not this season where he was really good, but last season where he was pretty rough after being really good the year before. So don't know what that means for this season.
He struggled against Miami when they ousted him in the playoffs, and I know he was hurt, and that was a big part of it. But I think a lot of Knicks fans started posting, that Randle was the reason why they were beaten, and it's a fair point. But he was also playing through injury, and that's something to take into consideration too.
Yeah, and then like the year before in 21-22, he was getting booed at home.
Yeah,
and that's a tough scene. That's a tough scene for a guy. I do tend to think that also maybe not. I would say that there's at least a pretty good chance that he sees the writing on the wall, which is and this kind of leads us to the main thing of the segment, which is there's been a lot of conversation about the idea of them making a trade. There's been increasing reports of like they are back in the market for looking for big star players. I've talked before on the show and others about my understanding is that the minute that Joel Embiid says, "All right, that's it," the Knicks are first in line. They will be waiting with the phone in hand to make the call as soon as that happens. They probably have a staffer whose entire job is to do that and listen to JD and the Straight Shot records. So I think from Julius Randle's perspective, there's probably a level of, hey, let's, I am working in concert with an organization that does not have my best interests at heart. That they're clearly, if there's going to be a star trade, I'm who's going to get moved. So I need representation that's going to at least be able to reflect things in the market and manage things publicly that will help me in that regard. That's kind of my read for it. My question for you would be whether it's Joel Embiid or another major star, do you feel like the Knicks are in a position to where they always chase stars too early for years and years and years? That was the whole thing, is Dolan just kept trying to get star players to fix it, and it was always a disaster. Are they at a point now where the organization is sound enough and they have enough talent to where they're ready to maybe make a star trade and try and contend?
I'm still recovering from the JD and the Straight Shot deep cut there. I'm sure half of, if not more than that, of our audience probably has no idea what you're talking about.
Go Google JD and the Straight Shot. It's a joy.
Yeah, but not unironically, that's probably part of the reason why they're not in a position to make a star trade. Like that organization, I just don't see it as stable enough. They have not achieved necessarily the kind of postseason success that the franchise wants, but look, Thibodeau has a reputation that's not exactly stellar around the league amongst players. At the same time, the front office just isn't significantly better either, especially when you, as you just alluded to, they're run basically by another agency. So either you play by their rules or you don't get to play at all. And that's kind of in an unfair position. I think Randle is a popular player amongst other players in the league, his peers. And as such, when you see how Randle's been treated by the New York market, and the fact that he has to seek out outside representation, I think that kind of scares off other players. So I can understand why Embiid might want to play in New York, but, it's New York. They're always going to attract some players there, but I just don't know if a star wants to commit to that, knowing that there's so much crap going on behind the scenes that they can't control. For a player's perspective, you want to be able to go into a situation where it's a seamless fit. You want to be able to have a voice that can be heard, that can have some influence in decision making and stuff like that. That does not exist in New York. And so that's why I think they're just not there yet. I don't know what it takes other than for Dolan to sell a team, and that doesn't seem like it's ever going to happen.
Yeah, ever. I kind of expect him to outlive me at this point, which is quite a bummer. I think I will say I think that Knicks team is really good. I have some concerns with the fact that I'm very high on them this season. I have some concerns about the fact that Tibbs had one.
Why are you higher on them? Why are you higher on them this season than they were last year?
Because they're a team that from the start of the season to the end of the season morphed in a lot of their identity. So they were still trying to basically play slug ball, Tibbs, let's play really hard defense. And by the end of the season, they were cooking offensively. And they added Josh Hart, which I think helps a lot with the shooting. Losing Obi Toppin does hurt because of how good their bench unit was. Their bench unit has been phenomenal the last couple of years. But I actually like a lot of what they kind of brings to the table with Brunson and Hart and DiVincenzo now. That very familiar trio, I actually do think provides a lot of balance offensively. And I'm kind of on a kick where I think the league is shifting from you need to have a solid defense that's going to provide your floor. I think offense has to be your floor now. I think that if you can't score efficiently, you're not going to be able to keep up. And surprisingly, the Knicks transformed into a high volume, high efficiency 3-point team last season, which was who's coaching these people? I'm still worried because Tibbs in the playoffs outside of the 2012 run has been, or 2011, Rose got hurt in 2012. Outside of that run, Tibbs has been really bad in the playoffs. He is not a coach that outperforms expectations. He underperforms pretty drastically. But he's also, I know he's a good coach and his guys will play hard. So I'm high on them from a regular season perspective from that view, which is one of the reasons why I'm okay, well, if I think their floor is pretty high, and they were to add a star player, what does that look like? And it's tempting. Part of this, though, just really, I always get worried about what happens when you take this to Dolan and he gets excited and then he's like, no, get that guy, whatever it takes. And then you wind up giving up more assets than you need to. They've done a very good job of not giving up more assets than New York needed to. So they have this cachet, but they still got to manage it so they don't overextend themselves. You need to still have a roster afterwards, and you need to balance this so that you can actually have sustainable growth with the star. Otherwise, you're going to fall into the same trap they've been in for years.
I think Randle's going to take a step back next year, this season, upcoming season. I think that's just been his MO is that, he has a couple seasons maybe, or one season, especially in a contract year, where he stands out and then kind of takes a step back. He was phenomenal last year. And I thought he should have been an all-star. He was really, really good. He was part alongside Jalen Brunson of that team's success, the biggest part of it, really. And they had some depth and everything else. But I think he was really, really good. I don't see him being, especially if he's making these kinds of moves where he feels like already it's me versus the organization. He might just not be engaged. He just might not be that kind of player that's going to be, ready to lay it all on the line for this Knicks organization. So I wonder how much that might play into it once the season actually starts.
On the other side, we'll talk a little bit about James Harden, who the Clippers apparently have said, no, we're good. And what does that mean for Harden, the Sixers, the whole situation? We'll talk about that on the other side on Locked On NBA. Right now, I need to tell you about Jase Medical. The Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. All it takes to get a Jase case is you just fill out a simple online form. Some cases, jump on a quick call with one of our board-certified physicians, and you get ongoing care from our physicians on any treatment-related questions. Doctor created, doctor recommended. There's been a lot of times when I've needed to get a dose of amoxicillin, whether it's for a respiratory infection or a sinus infection, or in some cases, I go hiking a lot, and there's cases where you wind up stumbling, and like I fell into an iron fence one time, and you're really worried about infection in those types of situations. So being able to get these type of things would save me a lot of time and a lot of hassle. Frank took a review of Jase's case and said it's easy as 1, 2, 3 and just in time. I received our package the same day I got a sinus infection, and my doctor was out of town. No appointments for days. Thank goodness it arrived. There's been all sorts of supply chain issues with so many medications, so not having to worry about that with Jase's case, I think, is a huge asset as well. Everyone should be empowered to take care of themselves and their loved one during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. The Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so that you're not just hoping you have access to medication in an emergency. They make sure that you have the medication in hand. Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com, promo code LOCKEDON. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Final segment here on Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us and making us part of your day. Appreciate you guys being here with us. Make sure to check out the show tomorrow. You got John Corrales and Jake Madison. Love that show. It's so good. Those guys are so good at covering the teams that they do and giving you all the lowdown on the takes across the NBA. On Thursday, you got Nick Angstadt and Pat the Designer. And on Fridays, David's partner, Wes Goldberg, alongside my partner, Adam Mares. All right, let's talk a little about James Harden. So over the weekend, actually it was early, I think on Friday was the last time this actually came out. There was a report on the Hoop Collective. Brian Windhorst, got to do the hand signals, did report that the Clippers effectively are good. They are okay on this. This was transcribed by Clippers Fan Nation. I'm getting it from hoopsrumors.com. The Clippers tried to trade for James Harden, and that deal didn't happen, Windhorst said. And from what I understand, it was the Clippers who said, okay, there's no deal here. We're going to move on. And while I assume they could certainly make a deal mid-season, I assume that this is what they're going to go with. So I do think it's notable that there hasn't been continued narrative about this. There hasn't been continued, the Clippers are still looking to get a James Harden deal done. They're very invested. Like, this isn't the same as it is with Damian Lillard in Miami, where Miami's like simultaneously, oh man, 34 and old, and look how many years he's got on his contract. Who wants that deal? Please give him to us. The Clippers, I think, are in a different type of situation because, one, Harden's not as good as Dame is at this point. That's just the reality of it, which is a real testament, honestly, to Dame that he's still as good as he is at this age. But Harden, I think in part one of the things is that I think the Clippers know, like, look, if we could get him for this is how this question was kind of posed to me. I got this response from 2 different GMs a couple of years ago with another star who was known to be difficult, who may have been the Eastern Conference Finals MVP this year. That essentially, like he's a huge pain, but there's a point where at a certain price, he's still this level of player, and that's always going to be worth it.
Caleb Martin?
that you're able to kind of get to a point where Caleb Martin's a saint. Thank you. You're kind of able to get to a point where even if you think there are locker room issues, if you are not like, yes, we can win the title, we know we can. Like the Denver Nuggets would not want to trade for James Harden no matter what the price is. Like they have no, what does that do for them? Like what, right. He doesn't make them better, right? But if you are a team that's looking to contend, there's obviously a price level. I do kind of wonder, like, this is kind of where it gets into the question, though, is are the Clippers, okay, we're clearly not going to be able to get a deal done with Morey on this, so it's not worth it? Or are they genuinely like, I don't want to deal with this drama because we have enough problems trying to get our guys on the floor and healthy and dealing with being essentially a massive disappointment the last 4 seasons?
I mean, I think it's the former. Why show any interest in Harden at all if you're not, willing to take on the eventual headache and or eventual parting that is bound to take place, because I mean Harden leads the league in fouls drawn and also requests for trades. So I think, the Clippers must have just figured out that they're not, that they're not going to be able to get something done, because Morey's asking price was ridiculous, because he's publicly said, no, we're just going to trade him. We're not going to deal with that, that they're not interested in making a deal. And so why not be willing to move on? If you can ask as much as you want to and say, look, this is what we're going to offer. This is what we're offer. Or if their package, whatever reported package they might be willing to include, if that has basically stayed the same throughout, maybe you make some tweaks here and there. But if that's not going to be enough to placate Morey and the Sixers, you got to move on at some point, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the whole vibe from it's why I was a little bit surprised they were interested at all. Because I know that
go ahead.
I know he and Russ get along, and I know that Kawhi is from my understanding is always kind of like, I want better ball handlers. Like, I want bigger star names. He's been pushing that pretty consistently, which I think is a big reason why they got Russ. But on some level, they come into their postseason press conference, and they kind of talked about, like, we got to take the regular season a little bit more seriously. And it seemed a lot like the Clippers kind of had a reckoning moment after how the season ended, of kind of going through everything and being like, we're not doing this the right way. Like, from an organizational standpoint, I think they almost lost Ty Lue over it, who's a really good coach. Like, Ty Lue is an excellent coach. And I think they almost lost him because of how much of a headache the entire apparatus of the Clippers is with trying to placate, honestly, Kawhi Leonard. Like, I don't blame Paul George for almost any of this. And maybe that's unfair by me. Like, maybe Paul George is a huge headache. I've never heard of Paul George being a huge headache. And Paul George's injuries have always been simple. And what I mean by that is, like, Kawhi's injury is very complicated. He has like a very complicated leg condition versus like Paul George has things like, I suffered a sprained knee. I tore a thing in my elbow. I got to get healthy. There's simpler things that he's going to deal with. And Kawhi's had various tears as well with the ACL. But they seem like they want to kind of get a little bit more serious just off the top. And I say this as somebody that really respects Harden, and he led the league in assists last year. Don't overlook that. He had some phenomenal moments in the playoffs. He had terrible moments, but he had some great ones too. He is not who you add if you're like, boy, we really want to get serious. That's just not what you do. You don't add James Harden if you're like, we need to set a tone in the locker room. That's not who you go get.
Interesting. I would have thought that they would be a little bit more understanding of who Harden is, and maybe they have a different approach to this particular season. Like, I mean, I feel like the Clippers, more than almost any team, it really just has to make some kind of move at this point, because they need to win. They need to be something. Like, how many years is this now of this pairing and this version, this iteration of the Clippers, and trying to figure out who they are, who's going to be available on a night-to-night basis, and whether or not they're going to be, I was rereading Bubble Ball from Ben Golliver, right? And he was talking about how the Clippers at that point in time, and I'd forgotten this 100%, that they were a title contender, that they entered the Orlando bubble looking to win a title. I was like, that far back? It's been 4 freaking seasons and they haven't done anything. And so it's like, at what point?
Look, if Kawhi doesn't get hurt in the 2021 series, I think they beat the Suns and make the finals, because that Suns team had huge problems with switch.
But he did, which is part of the problem. It's like their future is tied to somebody who's in and out of the lineup. I mean, and the joke is that he's on the sidelines in Colorado watching Deion Sanders and his team, and he's not even at his own team's games when the Clippers are in action. So I think that's kind of telling. And so, if you're interested in acquiring Harden, it's just my feeling. Again, I'm not reporting or anything like that. My speculation is that if you're interested in acquiring Harden, you know what you're dealing with, and you kind of you have to make a swing, because what else is there in order for you to be able to push all the chips at the table to be able to win this season, because this is it. This is your last opportunity to do so.
It's going to do it for Locked On NBA for a Tuesday. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us. We'll see you guys again next time. Until then, make sure to leave us 5-star reviews. Go to the YouTube page, look at Locked On NBA on YouTube. You can follow David's work over at Locked On Heat for more on the Damian Lillard saga. We'll catch you again next week, where I'm sure we'll talk about Dame some more, because that's what life is right now. But hopefully we'll have some muscle watch and other things as preseason gets all that much closer. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys again on Locked On NBA.